available if you want to give a clap.
And we know you want to.
Yeah.
I want to. Welcome and thank you for joining us for another episode of Catholicism, Not Just for Dummies. I'm Father Andy Vogel.
And I'm Father Andy Bierman.
And this will be a first time we do something with video, and we have a guest today.
You're right, yeah. So two firsts.
Two firsts, that's pretty good.
Right.
So, Father Isaac Landsteiner, you got upgraded.
I guess.
We are your hosts, Father Andy the Greater and Father Andy the Lesser.
Buckle up, we've got a lot to cover. This is Catholicism, Not Just for Dummies. So what have you been up to lately? Anything grand?
Well, I went up to visit my sister and saw the baby, new grandnephew.
Oh, it's nice.
That was nice. And then I'll go back up in later on in the month for the baptism.
Okay, I was just going to ask if you
Yeah.
were on duty for baptism.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
I baptized my nephew, so now it's time for the baby. And I did their wedding too. And
So have they received any sacraments not from you?
First communion, I think.
Okay. Confirmation?
No, I was the sponsor.
Oh, you're the sponsor.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's good. Let's see. Yeah, things are going well. Actually, this coming weekend, I am going to Milwaukee for a wedding for one of my former students when I was at the Newman Center in Mankato. And the wedding mass will be in the extraordinary form. So I just get to sit in quiet with my bread and tip my hat to the name of Jesus and Mary. So it'll be pretty sweet.
Yeah.
So,
but you just do it 3 times, and if they say the name more, then you take your hat off and put it on your lap.
okay, good knows. Good to know. I'll ask you for further instruction later. Great. Well, good. Isaac, it's so good to have you with us. I should tell you, we are talking about voting and how to vote as a Catholic. And Isaac is employed by the diocese.
Catholic Charities, technically.
Catholic Charities via the diocese via Catholic Charities. Is that
sure?
not
We'll go with that.
true?
We'll go with that.
Okay, sounds good. And so, in your position, what is, I don't know, your one sentence job description, if there is such a thing?
Well, the one sentence would be teaching and promoting Catholic social teaching in the diocese.
Okay. And maybe do we need to take a minute or two and explain what Catholic social teaching
it is the church's best kept secret, so we should probably explain it a little bit. Yeah, Catholic social teaching is basically
is it to keep up on social media?
No, it is not that. And it is also not to have social events at the churches. We've run into that confusion before as well. Catholic social teaching is basically a branch of moral theology, so it has to do with what we ought to do, what's right and wrong, particularly in a social context. So I like to say the 3 main spheres are politics, economics, and culture. So it addresses societal issues, one of which being politics and especially how to vote. So
So it's not just moral issues by ourselves, but it's when we get together as people.
Exactly. In society.
In community or society.
Yeah.
Which could include family too, I suppose.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So I was just told that we have an international audience, but in our own country, in the United States, the big election, the presidential election, is happening here in early November. And so it's on the minds, or should be on the minds of people and even Catholics. You know, how do I vote? Keeping in line with the teachings, the social teachings of the church, because as you said, politics is within the realm of, I don't know how you say it, the concern of the Catholic Church. Like, you know, we don't vote, or we aren't political beings separate from our faith.
Right.
And so how do we as Catholics, vote in line with our Catholic faith and being a follower of Jesus Christ?
Mhm.
Yeah, first, I think would be a good question is, someone just asked me, is do we have to vote? Because sometimes you can get just frustrated with the candidates that are offered, or even think, it doesn't really matter. So that would be the first question is, do we have to vote?
Yes, we do. We actually have a moral obligation to vote. I've been preparing for this podcast by going through the document Forming Consciences for Faithful Citizenship, which is put out by the USCCB.
So how would, if someone really wanted to do a deep dive, how would they find that document?
So I think we're going to post the document in the show notes for this podcast so that it's really easy to find.
Okay.
But if
We
for
have show
some
notes.
reason,
We do.
you do now.
Good.
But if for some reason people don't have access to that, you can just Google Forming Consciences for Faithful Citizenship. It's a document by the U.S. bishops. I found out just like an hour ago that the version I was reading off of is actually from 2008. So there have been some updates to it, but it's by and large, it's the same document as
So
they
it's
use
buried
today.
somewhere on the USCCB website.
Yes, it is.
Okay, the
Yeah.
United States Conference of Catholic Bishops
Mhm.
website.
Mhm.
Okay.
And
USCCB.org.
probably there's a more simplified version of these questions in the catechism, right? Like voting and social teaching and all that.
Probably some of it,
Yes.
but
Yeah, I think a lot of people have a hard time navigating the catechism. So I would suggest if you're looking for something more concise than the document itself, the bishops have also put out a couple of one-pagers, which, if there are any clergy listening, can be used as bulletin inserts too, leading up to the election. There's four
Great
different
idea.
inserts, and
Okay.
yeah, this document is fairly brief. It's only 30 pages, and it's a small booklet. It's not.
For a church document, that is really short.
Yes, yes, it is, and pretty easy to understand compared
Yeah.
to like trying to read an encyclical or something.
Yeah.
So yes, anyway, as I was saying,
Right.
in the document, I can't remember the paragraph number now, but it says that we do have a moral obligation to vote. And so, that we'll get more into the specifics of that later, but, there's value in, even if you don't feel like you can support one of the major candidates in a race, there's value in casting your vote for another candidate to signal that the two alternatives are not really in keeping with your moral vision or with the Catholic
Mhm.
Church's vision. Or you can also cast a ballot and not vote in a particular race.
Okay.
If you think all of the candidates are morally compromised,
Mhm.
and you can't in good conscience support them.
But then there's, like for us, there's other races that are going
Right.
on at the same time, like
Yeah.
mayor or state senator or
Mhm.
representative and all those.
Yeah, a lot of the focus gets directed towards the presidential race, but
Mhm.
there's every 2 years, there's always House of Representatives.
Right.
Oftentimes there's a Senate race,
Mm.
and then state legislators as well. Not to mention court appointments as well.
Right.
That's the one where I even sometimes find myself going to vote on election day and getting to the ballot and forgetting that there's a judicial race and not knowing who the candidates are. Or,
Right.
so it's always good to try to look up the sample ballot ahead of time,
Mhm.
which we can put a link maybe to the Minnesota Secretary of State website. But for other states, you can just type in the state name and sample ballot, and it'll show you all the candidates running for each office. And a lot of times it'll even link to a campaign website where you can learn more about the stances they take on
Mhm.
positions.
Okay, great.
And kind of background to that, that we have a more obligation to vote is, just that we as citizens, as Catholics, we should participate in the political, the governance of our own country.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
that kind of the background or kind of reasoning behind why it's a moral obligation to vote?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the bottom line is it's in keeping with human dignity. Like we have the gift of reason and of free will, and we're blessed to live in a democracy where we're allowed to use that to help form the social order. And so we have an obligation to use that to try to accomplish good. I think politics gets kind of a bad rap these days because there's a lot of negativity and division and cynicism. But one of the things Pope Francis says is a good Catholic meddles in politics. And he also says politics is one of the highest forms of charity because it serves the common good, which can sound kind of foreign to any of us who are following the news. The notion that the people running these campaigns are actually trying to promote the common good. And of course, we're all human, so they aren't always. Sometimes they're trying to advance their own party interests or their own personal interests. But that's the vision of what politics can be, is really just solving community problems together.
All right. Another question I have is, we're called to vote our conscience, right? In other words, does our Catholic faith and living that faith have any influence on how we vote, or do we just set that aside? And back when I was younger, it was probably before your time, but there were candidates who would say, I'm personally opposed to abortion, for example, but I can't impose my views on other people in the government or in society. So they would kind of set aside their Catholic faith as senators or presidents or whatever.
Yeah, I think that really gets to a misunderstanding about religious freedom. And, you often hear people say, that there should be a separation between church and state, or people complaining about certain people trying to legislate morality or, force your religion on me or whatever. And I actually found a very helpful quote from a document from the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, which, for those who don't know, is a Vatican department that's tasked with helping the Pope to interpret and clarify the doctrine of the Church. And so this particular text was written by Pope Benedict before he was the Pope. He was the prefect for this congregation.
Yes.
And it was approved by Pope John Paul, who is the current Pope. And the quote is this. It says, "For Catholic moral doctrine, the rightful autonomy of the political or civil sphere from that of religion and the Church, but not from that of morality, is a value that has been attained and recognized by the Catholic Church and belongs to the inheritance of contemporary civilization." So to break that down a little bit, the main distinction here is that there's a difference between what the Constitution does in the Establishment Clause. It says the government can't establish a state religion. And in the Free Exercise Clause, it says the government can't prohibit citizens from freely exercising their religion. That's different than saying your morality can't have any impact on how you vote or how you work as a legislator. And in fact, it has to be the opposite, because when you think about it, the notion of don't legislate morality becomes a little bit ridiculous if you give it more than a few seconds thought. Every law really is an instance of legislating morality. We would never say, if a candidate, assuming for some reason murder wasn't already illegal, if someone said we need to make it illegal and punish murderers, no one would say you shouldn't impose your morality on society. So what people are really saying, or what they really mean when they say don't legislate morality, is that they don't agree with the morality you're trying to legislate.
Or even wearing a seatbelt. It's all talking about what we should and should not do, which is morality.
Yeah, either directly or indirectly. Traffic laws are a great example, because the question of wearing a seatbelt in and of itself, or which side of the road to drive on, is not a moral question in and of itself. But the reason that we legislate about it is because we believe the state has an obligation to try to protect life. So there's a moral assumption there that if you reject that, you can't really have a functioning system of government.
And even for people to protect their own lives when they may not necessarily want to, like wearing a seatbelt, for example. I mean, you can get pulled over and ticketed if you don't have one. All right. So, what about those politicians that say I'm personally opposed, but I can't bring that into my voting?
It depends on the issue, but most of the times when you hear that, that's just a faulty understanding. If it's a Catholic who's saying it, it's a faulty understanding of how morality and public life interplay. There are some issues, and that gets kind of into the difference between legislating morality and legislating religion. So, for example, it would be problematic to say people have to go to mass on Sundays. That would
Make it
be
a law.
that would be going beyond legislating morality, because you're mandating that someone worship in the way that Catholics are obligated to worship, and punishing them if they don't. So there's instances like that, but there's also instances where prudence helps people to realize that a law against something which is immoral might not be practical or easy to enforce. So, for example, gay marriage, we can legislate against or not legally recognize gay marriage, but the actual homosexual acts to make those criminal is impractical, because in order to you just can't enforce that, so that would be a case where a candidate might be able to say, I'm personally against it, but I'm not in favor of criminalizing it, because prudence tells me that won't work.
Without invading their privacy.
We often hear it about other issues that, like abortion, for example, that can practically be legislated, and sometimes it's a misunderstanding of, like I said, the interplay between morality and good governance. Other times it can be an excuse, because they know that their position may not be politically popular, but that they do really personally hold it. So it gives them a way out, kind of. But
I feel like I feel like it might be useful to back up a little bit. And again, you may not hear this so much these days, but in the olden days, I don't know, 70s, whatever, like people would say like, I'm following my conscience, and it is true that the church encourages us to follow our conscience, but we also have a prior duty to form our conscience. But sometimes you hear people say that, like, well, I'm following my conscience, so like, how can that be wrong to vote for whoever I feel is right?
Right. I think that goes back to the 60s, probably, when there were certain theologians that were teaching you must follow your conscience over everything. Like, you take into account the church's teaching, but if you decide that the church's teaching isn't correct, then you follow your own conscience above all. And that's the conscience does not just mean doing whatever you want and saying I followed my conscience.
Right.
Exactly. So we have a duty to form our conscience, and if we do disagree with the church, to take the time to read the teachings of the church, and to see why, not just what the church teaches, but why, and to form our conscience in line. And if we do disagree or have questions, then we have to assume that the church is correct until we have formed our own conscience. And maybe this is the wrong place to say it, but I tell people, like, well, how old are you? I mean, like, okay, you're 30, 50, like, somehow you think that in 50 years you've gained more wisdom than the church has, in the last 2,000 years.
Right.
I think the heart of the issue is really that, like you're saying, your conscience isn't just whatever you want to do or whatever you think is right. It's really the voice of God speaking within you. And you have to be careful to avoid this notion that the forming of conscience is just between me and God. It is the Holy Spirit acting in us, within us, but it's in the context of a community, right? And so first and foremost, it's if you are Catholic, then you accept the idea that the church is being guided into all truth by the Spirit. And not on all issues does the church speak infallibly. It's on a specific on doctrine, right, and dogma, and on matters of faith and morals. So those are the issues as Catholics that we're obligated to accept. And on other issues, at times the bishops will offer suggestions. We're here in Minnesota, and every state has what's called a Catholic Conference, which is an organization that works with the bishops in the state to promote legislation that will advance human dignity and the common good. And oftentimes a state Catholic conference or the U.S. bishops will endorse a particular piece of legislation. And that's a circumstance where, you don't have to agree with them to be a good Catholic. But because, like you said, the church has 2,000 years of studying the human condition, and that privileged relationship with the Holy Spirit, we are obligated to listen to what the bishops say and take it into account, not just dismiss it out of hand or say, well, I think this, and so we don't have to listen to the bishops.
So could you say like the church gives us the principles, and then there can be legitimate debate about how to put them into practice?
Yeah, I think that's a very good way of putting
it.
Like
in running a government, or how much regulation to have on things and so forth.
Yeah.
So maybe we should start talking about, more voting more specifically.
Yeah.
So if I am a Catholic and I want to vote, like how do I do that? Or like what guidelines does the church offer?
I think you said was one question was just, is there a Catholic party that we can just vote for that party?
Yeah, I thought there was like a check mark where you can just like check a party and just like vote for the whole party down the whole ticket or whatever. But
I don't know if there is in the U.S. But
that's in the primary.
Okay.
Oh, maybe.
But yeah, is there a Catholic party?
Yeah, the short answer to that is no. There is a lot of people don't know this, but there is actually a third party in U.S. politics that was founded on the principles of Catholic social teaching. It's called the American Solidarity Party. So if you're Catholic and you're listening to this, I'd encourage you to check that out.
Cool. Yeah.
Right now, they're a very small party. And like every other party, even though they're based on the principles of Catholic social teaching, ultimately, unlike the church, they're not guided directly by the Holy Spirit, and so they can fall into error, right?
Okay.
So they still can be wrong about things, but it's a compelling option. But the bottom line is, right, every party is led by humans and is not going to be fully in accord with church teaching necessarily.
It's fallible in some ways.
Yeah, and when you're looking at the two major parties, especially, I see on Father Bierman's copy that the new version of Forming Consciences for Faithful Citizenship divides the issues up a little bit differently. But in this version, which is from 2008, it splits them up into, let me see here, human life, family life, social justice, and global solidarity. And if you look at just those four broad headings, and you apply it to the two major parties, and this is an oversimplification, but by and large, the Republican Party is much closer to the Catholic vision on the issues of human life and family life. And the Democratic Party is much closer to the Catholic vision on social justice and global solidarity. So you can see how a Catholic would naturally not really feel at home in either of the major parties right now, and feel conflicted about.
It was very interesting. I was actually going to the March for Life in the early 2010s, and they have kind of a convention or kind of a gathering where like different organizations can display information. So you can pick up like free pens and fun things like that. But one of the groups that was there was Democrats for Life. And I was very intrigued by that because traditionally the Democrats have been much better on like social justice or however you want to put that kind of part of it. And the Republicans have been better on the kind of the life issues. And so it was very intriguing to me to to see that. But they were saying like even what was it, the 2008 convention or whatever, like the leaders of the Democratic Party wouldn't even let them speak on the floor or whatever.
I think they pushed out the pro-life Democrats by and large. There's not many.
I think there are very few in elected office anymore, especially at the federal level. And I don't know if this number still holds true, but a number of years back, probably the mid 2010s, I remember seeing some kind of polling organization, it might have been Pew Research or something, that said that roughly a third of Democrats identified as pro-life.
Wow.
And I don't know if that would still be true because, like you say, that at a national level, the party has pushed out candidates who are pro-life. I think they're happy to have voters who are pro-life vote for I think they're happy to have anybody vote for their candidates.
Right.
But yeah, by and large, they've kind of tried to push out pro-life candidates.
We used to have Tim Penny in Minnesota. I don't know if you remember him. He was pro-life Democrat.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was just interesting to me because it kind of, not perfectly, like, again, I mean, the Catholic Church is not associated with any political party, but to me, it kind of bridged some of to me, it would be more of a Catholic party or a Catholic notion than the two major parties that we have of themselves.
And if you look at the history of the development of the parties, I don't know the exact numbers, but it's something like 80% of Catholics voted for JFK in 1960. And that wasn't just specific to him, although that was probably part of it because he was Catholic. By and large, the vast majority of Catholics voted for Democrats.
Yeah.
Right.
But I think I appreciate you bringing up the Democrats for Life for another reason, which is that sometimes we kind of make the assumption that where the parties stand on things is just kind of set in stone, or that the candidates in the general election are set in stone. But the reality is, if we're not content with the candidates or the platforms that we have to choose from at the general election, as Catholics, we need to get involved earlier. There's a primary election every year, and it's only something like 10 to 20% of registered voters participate in the primary election.
Okay.
Meanwhile, it's
That's a good reminder.
It's about 20% of the American population identifies as Catholic. And so if all Catholics were to vote in the primary, they would be a majority of the voters. And you could easily have those pro-life positions being brought back into the Democratic Party platform. You could have that concern for social justice and global solidarity brought back into the Republican platform.
And that's participating in the caucuses as well in the party convention, because there's delegates that go. When I was a seminarian in Winona, we participated in the Democratic caucus and got a majority of Catholics and pro-life people to this county convention, and we actually voted to change the platform of the Democrat Party, but it didn't carry through when it got to the state level. But it was kind of interesting to see.
That's cool that you participated in that.
The discussion and the opposition from the other side and so forth.
So when do those sort of things happen? Like a year before or like 6 months?
It depends on the state. But in Minnesota, the primary, so it's kind of confusing because in Minnesota, we actually have two primaries. We have, in March, there's a presidential preference primary, and that's where you vote for which candidate for president you'd like. And then there's just a primary election is what it's called. And that's for all the other offices. And that's in August. That actually just took place about a month ago. And then, of course, the general election is in November. But it depends, the timing depends on the state, but typically it's between 2 and 6 months before the general.